Let's continue with this app and let's make sure we actually fetch user input so that we can then, in the next step, also render it as part of a list of users. We got our add user component here with the add user handler, which is triggered when the form is submitted. And now the goal is to collect the two entered values, the username and the age, and utilize them here. Now, to collect the values, we can use a technique we already learned about in the last modules. We can use state management in React to update the state with every keystroke and hence save what the user enters in such a state variable, which is then managed by React. For that, we need to import the useState hook here inside of the add user component, and then we need to initialize it. For that, we call useState, and we can define the default, the initial starting state. And since I want to manage one piece of state for every input, the starting state will basically be no input, so an empty string. And then I have my entered username here and my state updating function set entered username. Now, in case you're not sure what this syntax means, make sure you go through the respective lectures in the basics module. This is a JavaScript syntax which is called array destructuring, and we use it because useState always returns an array with exactly two elements. And with this syntax, we're pulling these elements out of that returned array and we store them in separate constants of the name entered username and set entered username. And I chose those names for those constants because the first element of that returned array is the current state snapshot, and every time this component re-renders, which it for example does when the state is updated, this constant will hold the latest state snapshot. And set entered username, on the other hand, holds a function which we can call to change that state and to then trigger such a re-render cycle. So now we need a function which is triggered on every keystroke of that input here. And for that, I'll have my username change handler function, for example, where I get the event object because we'll listen to a default DOM event and such events will dispatch objects with more information. And we can bind this to input here through the onChange prop, which then will tie this to the change event listener. So here I pass my username change handler, and therefore this function will be triggered for every keystroke in the input element down there. And now here I will call set entered username, and I want to set it to what the user currently entered, and we can get that entered value with the help of that event object. Because there we can access the target of the event, which is the input, and then the value property of that input to get the currently entered value. Now I'll just copy that and repeat that to also have an age change handler where I call set entered age, because that's the second piece of state I now want to manage. Hence I'll duplicate this as well. And here I have my entered age and set entered age. And with that, we're updating the entered age on every keystroke. We of course also need to make the connection down there. So age change handler. And now we got both the username and the age stored. Now in add user handler, we can therefore now console log entered username and entered age, and entered age, like this. And if we now save everything, we can go back, open up the developer tools here and go to the JavaScript console and maybe enter max here and 31. And if I click add user, you see that output here. Now at the moment, we can also submit an empty form, like an empty age field, but that's something we'll fix later. Generally, fetching that data works. Now as a next step, let's make sure that when we click add user, we actually reset these inputs so that both input fields are empty again. And let's make sure we also have some basic validation, which simply makes sure that nothing happens, that we don't print this information here if one of the two input fields is empty or if the age is smaller than 1, or if it's equal to 0 or smaller than 0. So that's something you can try on your own next. We'll do it together in the next lecture, of course.